Ever since I was a young and I was into rapping 20 years later and I'm still here yapping. Guess I got so much to say, so I'm trying to educate all of us. I hope together we can elevate. Time flies and our life is moving so fast. What's the forecast? Good vibes to be broadcast. So come and chill with me as we let the bad vibes blow past. This is Shout Out Podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Shoutout Podcast after a very long break, and my apologies for that. But like I had mentioned in the Instagram live, I was saying due to like a lot of other commitments that I have, every Sunday won't be possible. So apologies for that, and apologies in advance for the Sundays that I'm going to miss also. To the guest that we have for today, I'm super excited because we really have a special episode on our hands today. She's an old classmate of mine, and we haven't met in ages, but we've been in touch through social media. And I had asked her, if whenever you're in town, whenever you're in Nagaland, because she's working outside, please do let me know. And then we have to make this happen. And she graciously accepted, and she was here. She's here in Dimapur for a few weeks, so I'm so happy that we could make this happen. She's most of you won't know her, because in the Instagram live I was just asking also, but she is low-key anyway. But mind-boggling educational qualifications and a super impressive resume she has. And like I said, very low-key, but I feel we should be shedding light on people like her and others like her, and that's why I'm so happy that this is happening. Welcome to the Shoutout Podcast, my friend Kilang Yanger.
Thank you, Sally. Thanks so much for having me.
Right. I'm super excited that we're having this because, like I just said, it's more like catching up also, because we haven't seen each other or met each other for, I think, decades also maybe.
Yeah.
When's the last time? I can't recollect the last time we've met.
Honestly, I don't know. But
right. Because we definitely have met after school,
right.
But yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like that long either.
Exactly. We were just talking before this started, and it just felt like old days. Yes. I want to start with how's your Nagamese? Because when we're texting and stuff like that, I see that you always make it a point to throw in a kiniga se in the beginning. So I was just wondering, is that your way of trying to keep in touch and not get too rusty with your Nagamese?
Honestly, I can speak Nagamese pretty fluently,
right.
And I'm out,
yes.
So I can speak one of my dialects okay. Not sure why that is the case. I think it's just my upbringing as well. So
right. Yeah. So when you're in touch with family and friends back home, I'm presuming it's mostly in English, right?
Mostly English, but certainly if the conversation takes place in a different language in that sense, then I'll
you can hold your own.
Yeah. Okay, maybe not pure hour.
Right.
Like church hour or something.
Yes,
that's a little beyond me. But yeah.
We have a lot to talk about on this podcast, but I just want to ask, how long have you been abroad? Because for those of you that don't know, she's based out of Boston, Massachusetts, and you've been working there for a while, but you've been studying also for abroad for a while. So what would you say is the year that you've been living away from home, when that began?
So I'm sure you will mention this at some point, but I went to Woodstock at a pretty young age as well. But outside of India, it's been 15 years plus.
Wow. So that is a long time.
Yeah, because as soon as I graduated from high school, I went to the States for college on a scholarship, and have just stayed on there.
Right.
Yeah.
And that 15 years that you're calling, is it the same pattern that you try to make it once a year visit back home for the past 15 years? Has it been like that or were you back home more often during the early parts, or how was it?
No, I mean, early parts, you're also a student, so limited budget wise.
Of course.
But of course, as you get older, you may be able to afford it, but then time is the issue. Right?
Yes.
So I do try and come home at least once a year. If it's twice a year, then that's amazing. Yeah.
Before we get into the other stuff, one more thing. You do many different things. I mean, how would you primarily identify your career? Like, how would you, when someone asks you, like, what do you do? Like, how would you describe that? Your actual...
I think for the most part, my training is a biologist.
Correct.
Or stem cell cancer biologist in that sense. It's only in the last 3 years or so that I've like actually pivoted from the more basic science, as we call it, meaning like bench, lab research, to trying to apply that kind of knowledge in the commercial biotech space. So right now, I work in a life sciences consultancy.
Yes.
Where essentially they hire people like myself to help biotech-related questions or science-related questions regarding like new therapies and developing the market and things like that. So.
Okay. So I ask this to all my guests. This question, we always start off with this: how has the pandemic been for you? And for the past 15 odd guests that I've had, it's been somewhat in the same region because they've all been here throughout the pandemic. You obviously were back in the States, so interesting to find out how was the situation there, and how did you deal with it personally, and also can you just tell us how the the ground situation was there in the States?
Yeah, actually at the beginning of the pandemic, I came to Nagaland.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because again, I mentioned I had a family member who was sick, and
yes.
So it was actually because of that. But after that, once travel was open, I went back to the States, and I think there. But again, at the same time, I live in Boston, which is. In the U.S. they call it like a blue state, right? So a democratic state,
right.
red state and whatnot. So for the most part, when it comes to vaccines and just like science-oriented types of policies and all, people for the most part comply. And for me, again, Boston is also just kind of special in that sense, where there's it's very heavily populated by students and university folks and all. So I would say my experience was people were very adherent to the protocols and recommendations that the American CDC, as they call it, the Center for Disease Control, the recommendation that they proposed. So when it came to social distancing or all of those, I feel like they were a lot more strict. But once the vaccination started coming out and all, by summer, meaning this year, I felt like things were back to normal, honestly. Like I could walk outside, and feel free without having a mask. If you made reservations to go into the restaurants and such, then you just had to sort of show your vaccination card, for example, to be in like an unmasked room with other guests who were vaccinated as well. So I would say it was a little bit more regimented, maybe. That's not true for all the
of course,
areas,
yeah.
But that was my experience in Boston, though.
So when was it that you went back to, after the travel restrictions were lifted?
Yeah, I went back actually in September.
Last year, 2020?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was in Nagaland for the longest time.
Yeah.
Had, left.
Okay, I wasn't aware of this. Yeah.
So yeah, but once I got back though, I think after having been in Nagaland, the contrast was quite stark. I would say, because in Nagaland you're here with extended family,
of course,
social distancing still includes your cousins.
Yeah, of course.
Whereas in the US it was very much it was we call them pods. You kind of hung out with 3 or 4 of your closest family members or friends, and you would try and organize events in such a way that it would still be safe, right? Outdoors or things like that. So yeah, quite different.
Okay, that's interesting. I just wanted your take on it because, like I said, obviously now you've mentioned that you were here for the initial part, but yeah, how it was abroad. And what's your take on the current situation in India right now with the ongoing is still around? So
people might think that it's stabilized and such, but
right.
I think we need to remember that it's still ongoing, right? Of course, we have been rolling out the vaccines at a high rate and such, but that doesn't mean that everything's completely under control.
Right,
Like,
of course,
we still
of
need
course.
to have some sort of order and protocol that needs to be followed. Just because there's like a big event and whatnot doesn't mean people can just throw away everything.
Exactly.
Like, you can't unlearn all that.
But that seems to be the case, right? Like, I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
with all the mega events that,
Yep. And so that's when you have those outbreaks. And,
Exactly.
and the longer the virus is here, it'll mutate as well.
Exactly.
And so I feel like what we were calling the new normal just is going to be part of our
Right, right.
normal.
We'll have to adjust to that as the new normal. Yeah.
So that's like the impact that the pandemic has had.
Right, right.
Like just our life has to sort of make room for that additional few steps to all of those things too.
Right. So, I mean, by now the audience will obviously know that this is going to be very science-based, like because of your profession. You're a biologist by training. You are a consultant in with the life sciences with your company, but that deals with life sciences and healthcare. And obviously that involves data analysis also. So I told you this earlier, but I'm going to request you not to undermine the intelligence of the audience, but to keep, if you can, like when we're talking about certain stuff that's science related, to keep it sort of like for speak in layman's terms, so that it doesn't go over our heads, because I know I'm going to get lost a couple of times. Yeah. And I was horrible in science back in school, but ironically it turns out that I do have a passion for science. With my very limited knowledge of it, I'm like a science fanboy, so interested in learning a lot. And yeah, it's going to be like a science lesson, but a fun one. So before we get into your career and stuff, let's get the shout outs out of the way. I'll give a shout out to one, and like I said, you can give a shout out. So my shout out, this episode shout out goes out to Room 03. So Room 03 is a cafe that's just here in Narajan, in Kuda village. And it's a nice place. They have a huge space. It's mainly meant for musicians, because they have gigs every weekends and stuff like that. So you definitely want to check out this place. It's a nice place. They have a stage, great food and coffee and all that. So Room 03. Shout out to Nurhe, Vigole, and I think there are three of them, the partners. So Room 03, check it out.
My turn.
Yeah.
Well, I think my first shout out is to you, Asale. I feel like,
Thank you.
Honestly, I mean, aside from this shout out podcast, which even in the States, I've had some of my friends actually tell me, oh, you should listen to this. I'm always like, oh, that's my old classmate.
Nice.
But I feel like even your past and current endeavors are very telling of, your passion for just like the Naga people, society, and really trying to get into what our real interests are. So I think
that's so nice.
That's my first shout out. Second shout out would be to Leisure Island. It's a bouncy rental castle for hire company. So with the festive season coming up and all, if people want to hire those bouncy castles or pools, then that's one. The third one, I guess, is, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, is Kaki Marketing.
Yes.
I think they're doing a great job, just like trying to capture the Naga audience with a Naga voice and Naga eye as well, and also a fresh take, I would say, trying to be more wholesome and such. So yeah, I think those ones. And actually the last one is Muffet's Pantry. Not that new, but I think they've been in the game for a while, which also speaks to just their quality and consistency.
Yeah.
So yeah, those would be my shout outs.
Nice, plenty of shout outs. So do check out, we're going to plug in all their accounts and stuff like that. So yeah, do check it out. Let's rewind and go back into your childhood, and just want you to just in story form, I guess, just take us through childhood. I know because we did study together for a long time, but you can start wherever you want to start and just take us along your journey, childhood.
Yeah. Born and brought up in Kuima for the most part. Went to Little Flower School up until class 4 or 5, one of them. And so during that time, I would say just very average student, definitely interested in this and that. But even then, I have to give shout out to the teachers. I feel like from a very young age, having good teachers and good mentors makes such a big difference. Like
Yes.
I remember feeling like I wasn't good at this, or I would never see myself doing this, you know. But certain teachers like made me get out of that comfort zone, even from LFS days, you know. But after that, I think, as you know, came to Woodstock,
Yes.
boarding school in Missouri for a long time. Graduated from there, and I would say it was in Woodstock that I feel like I really, in some ways, blossomed. You know, I think it's the style of teaching that's a little bit different than the Indian system,
Right,
or at
right.
least as it was back then. That sort of touched upon different aspects of my learning abilities and my interests. So a little bit more emphasis on like the creative side, or
Yes.
looking at things from a different perspective, exploring things in a different way, you know. Like I was never good at memorizing things. So during Woodstock, like was able to explore that intellectual side in a different way. I really, that's when I fell in love with learning, I would say. And I think just having the opportunity to have like, you know, take part in so many different extracurricular activities, whether
Exactly.
music related, sports related, was
I'll just cut you off once, because like back in school you were obviously very good in studies. By that time you were saying you were average back then, but like, you know, when you're in Woodstock, I remember you would be always one of the better ones in our class, in our grade. So besides that, you were very active with the co-curricular activities, music and sports. Which did you lean more towards, because you were in like school teams and stuff like that, and with your music also? So besides the actual schooling,
Yeah, maybe aside from the actual, like, you know,
classes,
classwork, maybe sports, because whether it was like cross country, which is a very individualized sport,
Yes.
to say basketball, which is obviously a team sport, you know, like looking back, and even then, some things that you take for granted have come out of like playing sports, I would say. And it's not so much like the physical act of playing sports, but it's just learning life lessons, honestly, you know.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
So I would say, aside from the studies, sports played a big role, I would say.
I just quickly want to add on what you're saying regarding sports and how it develops a person, or a student, at least at that time, so many other things besides the physicality, you know, like there's like leadership training is also instilled from, you know, an early age, socializing skills with teammates of younger, elder, and there's so many other things, discipline, that are you know, ingrained into someone who's into sports from a young age. And that's when I'm preaching about sports and how it needs to be revamped in our part of the world, in schools. These are the things I keep pushing. So thank you for mentioning that. That was so nice to hear. But yes, continue on after Woodstock. And sorry, Woodstock, when you're about to graduate, what were you thinking about that time, career wise? I mean, like, you wanted to get into this, that.
So I was in Woodstock for a while, but then I went to Australia, like in 10th grade, on an exchange student program. So that was my first experience with, like, you know, the Western world in that sense. And I really enjoyed it. So that was like another confirmation for me that, like, I really enjoyed Woodstock in general, where the education system was different than the Indian system. And the Australian system was another one too. So for me, I really wanted to go abroad for my study abroad. I mean, for my, you know, college years and all. So I told my parents, gave them like a heads up, you know, thinking like 2 years, hey, like, you know, I really want to go abroad. Partially because, like, just keeping in mind the financial considerations, you know.
Of course.
I mean, even for a what we would call like a middle class US family, college is not a small ordeal, you know. So I just remember my mom saying, like, okay, just pray about it, you know, let's see how it goes. And fortunately for me, I got a big scholarship. It was a 4-year scholarship. They even gave me like round trip tickets to come from, you know, India to the US to the college, and such. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I landed in Carleton College, liberal arts college. Had the option of going to engineering schools and such, because that's what I thought I was going to go into.
Right.
But then, like, liberal arts sort of appealed to me because it gave me another opportunity to like just continue to expand, learn things beyond what I thought would be my interests and such. So I was taking like all sorts of random classes.
Like example of what classes would you be taking?
I was taking class on like contemporary Russian culture and society, which was like actually really fun. I took some classes on like African American history, like, you know, the Harlem Renaissance classes. Of course, I was taking my, you know, those were my electives in that sense, but I was always taking science classes.
Right.
So, yeah, and the U.S. colleges normally are like 4 years. At the end of the second year, you have to sort of declare your major. So I declared myself to be a biology major with a minor in cross-cultural studies. Just switched from, I think physics, business things to biology, partially because my physics professor nominated me for a summer fellowship that enabled me to do full-time bench research in like a university. And that funding came from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which is the second largest science philanthropy organization after like the Gates Foundation. So went to Columbia University in New York, wanted to experience that summer in New York, you know, and sort of confirmed that like, okay, maybe like lab science, biology related stuff is something that I do want to pursue. So declared my major and then did the classes to sort of complete that.
Okay. So when you were done with this, were you planning to get to work straight away? Did you want to do further studies? Like, because you got your PhD, but like, what were you thinking at that time?
Yeah, I think the move to do a PhD was like not immediate, you know. How
old were you by the time you had graduated from?
I was 21-ish.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to work, but I wanted to work in like a science setting. So that's when I moved to New York, went to Cornell, and was working as like a lab assistant in a stem cell lab, actually.
Okay.
So that's where like my first interest and first exposure to stem cell research came through. And did that full time, meaning like it wasn't just for a summer, it was for like you know, X number of years.
Right.
A year and a half or so in my case. And then
how hard was getting this job? How hard or easy was it getting this job? And how like, was it well paying, or how was it, like, you know?
It was tough. I would say, because it was also another prominent lab, you know, in New York City. So like all the other kids who sort of were not interning, but like joining at the same time to work were all from like Ivy League colleges. They were all from like Harvard or Princeton.
So that level,
So I felt fortunate to be getting that job in that sense, and very international. That was also during one of the World Cups, you know. So I think like 20 nations were represented in the lab itself alone, you know. So that was like fun times there. Well paying. I mean, it's a entry level position, so not very well paid, I would say, but certainly. I mean, I have the lens of having worked in science for so long, you know, and unfortunately, compared to like the humanities or the arts, like science has always been a little bit prioritized, maybe, you know, so like more funding has gone towards science.
Yes.
So I would say for somebody in my position, like it was fine. But of course, remember, this is New York City.
Yeah, of course.
That just have to be frugal with your means, like not living beyond your means, you know, even if the city is a place that offers everything in that
exactly.
sense. But yeah, I mean, some friends went straight into iBanking or into like the Peace Corps or things like that. So I would say I had like very extreme spectrum of like friends who, you know, were making like six figures by the time they were like, you know, in their early 20s and such, to people who were like making nothing as like volunteers in like say some country in I don't know.
So you were working there for you said a year and a half roughly?
Yeah, right, year and a half, 2 years ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
What and was the PhD following this immediately, or so what prompted
actually, I would say, you know, to go into science and like in particular like cancer biology, even though I hadn't really, even though I wasn't very cognizant of it at the time when it happened, was before college, right after I graduated from Woodstock, and I was getting ready to come to the US and all, my father unfortunately got diagnosed with cancer. And, you know, like obviously there are a lot of families that have been affected by cancer and such, but at least for us back then, it felt very traumatizing, very alien, very foreign, you know, like we knew like certain individuals who had it and such, but at that time it almost felt like a death sentence, you know, and like just not knowing what are your resources here and there and such. Was very fortunate to have gotten like really good care. Of course, we had to get out of Nagaland to get that, you know, which I'm very aware that not everybody has that kind of option
means,
too.
yes.
So that's something that I hope can improve in Nagaland, just like healthcare system and such, which I'm sure you'll touch on. But so I think that had a lasting impact, still does, I would say, that it wasn't just like my father's experience, I would say, but sort of opened my eyes to just the complexity of this disease, what, like, you know, just the uphill battle in some ways that needs to be like, you know, to be overtaken in some ways to sort of make a dent, make some impact and such. So I was applying to various PhD programs during that time, and I eventually chose University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia to do my PhD there. They sort of, these schools, once they accept you or once they get your application, they think you're a candidate, they sort of like wine and dine you. Actually, it's very nice, you know, like they'll fly you out to the various places and like just have like a weekend full of events for you where you get to see what life here might be like. And I chose the university partially because I felt like they had a big focus on like mentoring the students. It was like very student oriented, you know. So yeah, new city. I was sort of keen to move out of New York City at that point, even though I did have the opportunity to like continue to live there. And yeah, started my PhD studies there in Philly.
How was that process? Your whole PhD going after you, and how long did it take you?
I was one of the fortunate ones that kind of finished it a little bit sooner. I was one of the ones who finished it a lot ahead of, say, some of my cohort members, you know, maybe like half a year to 2 years ahead of some of them. And so that's really sort of determined by the type of project that you're on, what the questions are, and even just luck in some ways. You know, you can't sort of predict how long certain experiments might take and such. Overall, I would say I had a very positive PhD experience. Really, it was challenging, really got to like expand, grow out of my comfort zone in that sense. And for me, I also partially did it because I think it requires consistency. Like with PhD, it's a long process. You kind of have to have that tenacity to continue, you know, like there's so many times that your experiments will go awry or like, you know, when you finally submit your papers for publication and such, at least in my field, it's all peer reviewed, meaning like other experts in the field, you know, like, you know, will be reviewing it and then sending comments regarding whether it should be published or not. So you kind of have to be ready that sometimes it won't go your way, you know. So there's a lot of dejections in that sense. And at least in my field, we sort of have two things that you have to overcome. One is what we call the wall. And at some point, and I think even marathon runners have this, it's called a wall, where at some point you just feel like you're hitting that wall and cannot surmount it anymore, you know? You kind of just have to get over that. And I thought after like, I was just like, oh, that's so metaphoric, or is it really a thing, you know? But I certainly hit that wall. And you, just have to pull the bootstraps and just get over it. The second one is something that I would say actually extends beyond your PhD, is the imposter syndrome. And it's something that they say women are more afflicted by than men. But it's a phenomenon that relates to people feeling like they're not qualified enough for whatever job or whatever position they may be in. You know, like you're constantly feeling like I don't deserve to be here.
Right.
Like, why am I here? All these people are so much smarter than me, that kind of thing. So those are things that you have to like overcome as well.
Did you go through that, the imposter syndrome?
Yes.
Okay.
Still go through that, you know. But I think that allows you to sort of, again, just go beyond your comfort zone, you know. So yeah, overall, had a great time. Outside of lab, I was very much involved in the student government as well, and created like a fitness program for the campus
I read
as well.
about this. Yeah.
Yeah.
How were you managing this while you're wasn't it taking up too much of your time, or?
I think you have to like balance it, you know, like there are days when in the lab things are not as busy. Like just say you have like long experiments that have like large windows of open thing, time when you can do certain things. And I mean, I will say it's not ideal to be doing
too
those
much
things.
other things.
Because at the end of the day, like you're there to do a good job with your thesis as well, you know. So but yeah, I was in a place where I could focus some time on that. Yes, it did take some time away from my work, such that I graduated like maybe say a few months like later than I could.
So not that major.
But so that was great.
And what was your thesis on, your paper on?
My PhD thesis was on, the title was cellular and molecular mechanisms of liver regeneration.
Okay.
So, no. It's just it's mouthful, but essentially trying to understand how the liver regenerates, right? So regenerates meaning how does it grow back and whatnot.
Right.
I mean, the liver is one of the few organs that has the capability to do that.
Regenerate itself.
Regenerate itself. So what I mean by that is, you know, if you think of the liver, it's not just like one solid organ. There's like what we call multiple lobes, right?
Okay.
So think of it as having like this flap and that flap, whatnot. So experiments have shown that, at least in a healthy liver anyway, you can cut off a certain percentage of the liver, and then the liver can compensate for that loss and grow to like roughly the same size. How the liver senses that, hey, like part of me is missing and I need to grow to X amount so that I can be, you know, to my original size, it's not fully known. But I was trying to address or understand questions around that, like regarding how the liver can do that, you know, especially not so much in like a surgical injury, but like more in the context of like pharmacology injuries. So what I mean by that is, you know, the liver is very important for clearing a lot of toxins, whether it's from like regular food or, you know, substances like drugs or alcohol and such. And so how the liver manages to not collapse and like maintain and continue to be healthy to a certain extent, I was trying to address those types of questions there. So
Fascinating. After this, what were you thinking? Like, now, I got my PhD. Like, because you're gonna explain what you did, but like, did you still feel like you needed to do more before you were actually off onto your career as such, or like?
Yeah, the funny thing with science is that the apprenticeship is very long. Right? So maybe back in the day, and I mean this like say in the 50s or 60s maybe, like the idea was once you finish your PhD, you get like a tenure track professorship, or, you know, you start to teach and you're a professor in that sense. But more and more so, it's become such that you kind of need additional training because things are getting a lot more specialized as well. Also it's more competitive. There's fewer, you know, open positions in universities. It's not like a fast turnover type of industry, right? Like people retire. That's when you have that open position come up and all. So it's not unusual. I would say large majority of people have to do a postdoctoral fellowship, as it's called. And those are some of the years where you sort of establish like the beginnings of what your own lab might be.
Right.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about this. Harvard Medical School in Boston. You went there to do your postdoctoral fellowship.
Yeah.
Explain to us what that is actually, and how your experience was with that.
Yeah, postdoctoral fellowship is interesting because it's somewhat in the middle, honestly. Like,
Okay.
you're in the middle of, you're not quite a student, but you're still considered like a mentee.
Yeah, like
you
a
know?
trainee. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And then, but you're not quite a professor either, right? So you're sort of in that middle step, trying to, again, establish yourself, establish what your lab might be and such. And for me, I met like very smart people and, just had like good friendships in that sense too. But it was during that point where I came to recognize that being a professor, like having my own lab, was not what I was like very passionate about. Like, I had a really good time in grad school, not just with my thesis, but just overall,
Yeah, the
I would say.
yeah.
But then my postdoc was something where I came to recognize, like, do I want to do this long term? And that's not where my passion
The
was.
passion was.
Yeah. And so I'm just somebody who doesn't believe in doing anything like without 100% or like full-heartedly.
Yeah.
So
Amen to that.
yeah, so started to but I knew that I still wanted to be in science.
How long was this? Sorry, but the
worries.
postdoctoral, huh? How long?
Little less than 3 years.
Little less than 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would say a year and a half in or so, I started to recognize this and wanted to transition out. So started exploring what some of those opportunities could be. And finally sort of recognized that working in like a consultancy that's very much focused on like the life sciences or healthcare was like a place where I could, not only learn, but also use my training during from my PhD years, my science background in that respect though.
Okay, so this is where you got into your current job right now. I mean, like the firm that you're working with, which is the Clarion Healthcare, right? So explain to us, like I said once again, leaving aside the jargon, scientific jargon, and just tell us what it is you do, and so that the people get an idea of what it is you actually do. Because when you send me this, like about what you do, and I've seen like your social media also. I know what you do, but I don't know what you do like exactly. Yeah. So
no, I mean, it's a good question because I think when we say management consultancy, it's such a broad umbrella term, and it can mean anything, So the field, at least the industry rather, is healthcare, biotech, right? So it's not like we will be getting projects on like oil or McDonald's. Like those are not our clients. Our clients are people who are in the life sciences, so they can be very early, like startups, or they can be your very established companies.
Big pharmas.
Yeah, big pharmas, global, multinational companies and such. So the way, at least in the US and for the most part, most countries, that the way that new drugs enter the market to treat patients and all, they have to be in like preclinical studies, right? So that means like non-human studies, things that are done in the lab, Then you have to get approval to have those studies be done in humans. You need to like, validate the safety, the efficacy. As we say, efficacy just means like how well does this thing work, right? You have to sort of go through very stringent measures before you can launch a drug, and even and it doesn't guarantee that like even after launch that the drug will be successful, right? It may be the best drug out there for a certain disease, but if you don't if the company doesn't have the right strategy and implementation to how that can take place, it can be a failure. There's so many case studies that's been the case, so it's actually very strategic. I myself didn't appreciate this as much until I am and still learning in the field, but we essentially can help companies in any of those phases. It can be literally helping them with their first product to see which disease does it make sense for their drug to address, or it can be very late stage, meaning they've already done all the studies and now they're getting ready to launch the drug, and the thing is, these are years ahead of time, right? Like 4 to 5 years ahead of your anticipated launch time, people have to be planning all
Yeah,
these, you know, because it's very complex. Many dynamics to account for, not just from the patient side, but from like the physician side, and at least in the US, like insurance side and such, you know. So so there's a lot of work that can even go into just making sure that the launch of the drug is done in a way that would enable it to be successful. And even post that, I've certainly done work on projects or like worked with companies that have very established drugs that are currently in the market for, say, a certain disease, but they want to see which other diseases they can, you know, cater to or like treat. So like those are considered like life cycle management, portfolio management types of you know, projects. So again, like it can be from very early, you know, commercial side of things all the way to very mature markets. And I work with like any stage and lots of diseases. I work a lot with like oncology diseases, rare diseases, and others as well. So yeah,
so
it's a bit wordy, but that's
I get. And so like obviously you are now like you told me you've been promoted to manager from a senior associate. Just that was just very recent, like when was that?
Back in the summer. Yeah.
So we were just discussing and you were telling me about how hectic it is also. I mean, like you are trying to make a change to it. And just tell us of quickly, like, you know, with the audience also, how the journey was, because you've been at this firm for, you said around about 3 years. So your entry level job, how that was, and just how it progressed to where you are now.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine this varies from firm to firm, but for the most part, like when you come in as a new, you know, person, especially without this type of industry experience and such, then you're more of an analyst, right? So you're put in teams. It's very, very rare that you would be doing a project by yourself. You know, so it's oftentimes teams, and your role with those would be a lot of like data analytics, like diving deep into databases and those types of things, you know, like it can include just making sure you are collecting very good recaps of conversations that might have happened between the team and the client, for example.
Right.
And as you progress up the ladder, like your responsibilities change and expand, where at some point you will be managing a lot of it's more managerial in the sense that not only do you have junior colleagues to manage because you are the case team lead, right? Making sure that the work is on track, people are doing what they need to do, they know what they need to do. Then you also have to sort of manage your upper colleagues, meaning your senior colleagues who are like the owners in that sense of that project, but you are the one who's like managing it and such. And then you also have to manage your clients, the companies that are hiring you to do this work, you know. So you have to be the point of contact for a lot of these, which is not to say that sometimes you don't have to do the actual work yourself, like the analytical work, you know. You need to make sure that it's correct, and you need to be the go-to person for a lot of things, you know, troubleshooting, work planning, making sure everything is on the right time frame and such. So it's a lot.
It's a lot, no? Yeah. I can
and you kind of just sort of become more versed in it as time goes. But I would say, the responsibilities are a lot more.
At this point of time, would you say like you are happy with where you are at your, like, you know, the way that your career is evolving, or your job as of now?
I would say I didn't think I would be where I am right now, you know. At least with my firm, I've been able to work on like many different projects, learned a ton. It's one thing to sort of read about certain things, but it's another thing to actually be in the weeds, you know, and be like thought partners, especially with like strategy and such with the clients, or even just like upper management, or, you know, like the senior colleagues, right, who bring so much experience and such. So there's a lot of richness to being able to learn from experience.
Right.
And from people and just being in it, which you can't get from like reading about it. So I would say I've been fortunate to be in these types of positions to do that.
And I mean, you obviously mentioned it's a lot. It's hectic, stressful. What about your social life? How does that work? Do you get time to go out? How's that like?
Yeah, I mean, so this is obviously the pandemic times.
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't.
If it wasn't, like I feel also fortunate that the colleagues that I do work with, like you can actually hang out with them after work. I know like certain occupations or certain things like work is work and your personal life they're very like mutually exclusive. But for me, I've been fortunate to have like colleagues who I can like mix that a little bit with. And on top of that, just having like non-work friends as well. Whether it's from this circle or that circle, you kind of have to like establish that, every time you go to a new city anyway, right? And especially as an immigrant, it's not like you have like family so you just get used to developing your own circles in that sense.
Perfect segue into what I was going to ask you about. I mean, because you told me you've been there for close to like 15 years now, studies, work, everything combined. And obviously we know that there are not too many Nagas that are residing in the US or even studying, working, whatever the case may be. But you mentioned that when you reached Boston, because prior to that you knew of Nagas that were here and there, but being such a huge place, you can't be like just visiting them or making plans and such. But when you moved to Boston, where you are right now, you were surprised to find quite a few Naga families.
Yeah.
So there's like few things I want to ask you on this. First of all, like what are they doing there? Like I mean, I'm always fascinated with like Nagas who've settled there, like So that's one thing. Second is we both know about the now I found out, I thought it was annual, but biannual event that you guys have, like the Nagas residing, whatever the name is of the Nagas in US. And those two things. And third is, what is sort of like the things you talk about us back home or the state back home. You get what I'm saying? Basically
so
all
three
that.
questions there. The first one is just occupancy, or what do people do there, right? I mean, this is just based on my experience, but I think the Nagas that I've met, not just in Boston, but like a lot in, say, states like Texas, for example, like a lot of the older generation have certainly come from like a theological side. They came to the US for seminary studies and have like stayed on, for example. That I would say that's a large
That's
swath.
the majority, right? Yeah.
But I would say the younger generation are coming in for like school, like that's not theology related. Like myself, I guess, came for school, for college. I am a little bit unique in the sense that I came for my bachelor's onwards, but like there are people who come for like masters or like PhD programs for other things, I think those are the two main ones, like theology and like some form of education. I would
What about
say.
the you said like a couple of families in Boston who happen to be owls? So what are they doing? Like
the parents, or at least the people who came, they are theology based.
Okay.
So like they work in the church or
so all of these, the ones that in Boston and around, are
they're all
in
like,
that. Okay.
Their kids, however, are in various fields. Some are in engineering or this and that. So the next generation of Nagas are like not theology based, or they don't have to be theology based. Like
what it was. I mean, that was the case back then, right?
Yeah.
The majority.
I mean, there's some Nagas who are in the military now, in the U.S. military. So
is there
including my own
or...
cousin, actually. So, or she's training right now.
Training to get in.
Okay. I think that first gen, you come in for various reasons, and then the second gen, once you have established here,
your parents are living.
You pursue your own interest. In
the American dream or whatever it may be in any field. Okay.
The second question was
the association, the Nagas in US.
This is the Naga American Foundation, NAF, as we call it. Like you said, meets every 2 years, and it varies like the place. It can be on the East Coast,
West
Coast, and the most recent one we were supposed to meet last year in New Jersey, but we had to cancel it obviously because of the pandemic and such. But that's another actually like really fun way to meet, other Nagas. I mean, if you're connected to NAF via Facebook or whatnot, then you're in the know, right? So as long as you're in the know and you can make it happen, then you can still have that kind of connection, So in spite of us not meeting, a few times during the course of the pandemic and such, people were organizing like Zoom calls, to just meet like as a smaller group here and there and such. And so those are not very, I mean, it just requires somebody to like give a, to say like, hey, would people like to meet up and such. And so
someone to initiate,
exactly. But various topics are talked about. It's not very structured in that sense. It's mainly to like meet up and eat Naga food and
just catch up with each other.
And like also connect like some of the younger families or newer people who are in the US, so that's like a great resource for young like newer people to get connected to, because these other families that have been there for like many more years can give so many tips,
exactly
on just like things like how do you get a car, how do you navigate this and that, which some things can be very, very foreign to like a new immigrant. So
I can imagine. So when was the last like physical meet that you went to?
I went to one, not to the last one, but the one prior. Okay. That was in Syracuse, New York.
Okay.
The one after
Around
that
6
was
years back? 4 years back?
4 years back,
okay.
I think 5 years now.
Okay.
The one after that was in California, which I wasn't able to attend. And then the next one
was the one
I
that
was
was
supposed
canceled.
to go, but we canceled that.
So the last one you went to, what was like the turn up like?
Yeah. Let's see. Honestly, I don't know the exact numbers, but it has to be like 100. Like I would say like 90 to 100 maybe.
Okay. That's pretty decent.
Yeah. And again, like all,
it's not like everyone's gonna turn up for that.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't just like only Naga families, right? It was also like individuals who had like whose spouse was Naga, but then they may not have been Naga either. So it's like it's open in that sense, like to
any connection to Naga basically. That's nice.
And then you meet people who your parents knew about and you heard about like back in the day, and you never
that's
met,
the cool part, right?
Like so I met like all these people that like my uncles knew about, or so it was nice as well.
And like I asked, like what is the sort of general consensus about some of the major or the just general topics or issues that's going on back home? Like what do you guys talk about when you talk about like because like you said, it's not structured that you're gonna talk about this or that, but I'm sure throughout the discussions you talk about things back home. And can you just share with us some of like the thoughts that people that are residing in the US, like Nagas residing in the US, think about like the situation here? Not just, I don't mean like politically or anything, just generally.
I think it's very natural to compare, like your lifestyle versus there and whatnot, and certainly a lot of like pros and cons are like discussed, right? Like saying like, back home in Nagaland, like that expanded family structure is so important, whereas here like you don't have that, or things like that. I mean the usual things of like people complaining about how bad the roads are, that's always
so
there.
That's happening all the way in the US.
Unfortunately. But then certainly we also talk about the progress, like for some people they haven't been home for so long, and when they go back and then come back, they're amazed by like the progress that has happened. And something that it's not just unique to Naga families and all, it's in some ways, the diasporic communities can be a lot more conservative than, say, like the home communities, right? Because they leave with like a certain notion of home, and they try and maintain that for several years or whatnot,
I get that.
Whereas like the home culture has like progressed, or at least moved on to certain things and such. So I think that culture shock also is discussed, where people might be like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize it would be like this or that, So again, overall comparison, but also just reassessment of like how the Nagaland they knew versus like the Nagaland now, So.
Okay. I just want to get your opinion on one thing. I mean, we discussed about this, and you said you don't feel like you are too well versed to talk about on such topics and such. But just one thing quickly. I mean, two things actually. But one is you come here to Nagaland almost every year, at least, even if it's just a short trip. You're in touch with people back home and stuff like that. Career wise, just like individually for the young kids, what do you think is like a good space? Like it can just be a broad sector that you're talking about, stuff like that. That's one. And one, the second thing I mean is the state in general, for our economy to progress. Which are the sectors do you feel we should be like sort of focusing on? Just this is totally personal opinion. Like just like.
Yeah, and like you prefaced, I don't have the full picture in that sense.
I totally get that. Yeah.
Been out of, but so, I do try and like keep in touch and such. But I think our parents' generation, like the government job was like the gold standard. It was like something that everybody strived for good reasons in that sense. Like the benefits, the pension system. It's like if it works, it's like amazing, right? Like the benefits that you can get from that if it works. But now again, it's like not everybody can get a government job. There's only so many posts available, and I think like things have changed. Things are a lot more open than back in the day, right? Like we couldn't even have like foreign tourists come in for like X number of years. Had to get like special permits and such. So things are a lot more open. The advent of like the internet and all has really just expanded people's ability and capability to access information that they may not have been able to.
Right.
From whatever like subset of society, right? And again, I may be talking from my blind spot may be that like I come from a certain upbringing and such, but like I think maybe back in the day it was like the people who had things could continue to have things, but maybe now it's like it's anybody's game potentially,
right? Where
if you have the drive, if you have the ideas and such, this entrepreneurial spirit can sort of drive you, can take you places. And the little things, the few things that I read in the papers and hear about, like like a kid who's able to top the exams or is doing something different with an approach to e-commerce or whatever, like it's really encouraging, honestly. So I think this self-starter mentality is really important. What may sort of be the barrier to that is sometimes capital and support. So like even if you have the ideas, you may not have the monetary support or whatever to like launch
to get it started.
So I think that's some of the barriers. And I mentioned like the importance of like teachers and mentors, and I'm not sure if we have maybe a formal structure or something for like the young kids or young entrepreneurs to access, right? Because there's so much you can learn from each other and from people who have done it in some ways, so it would be great to have, it doesn't have to be a formal setting, but some sort of organization where you are able to bring together these people who want to launch their own
So on this note, shout out to a couple of organizations or groups or companies like the STPI, which is the Software Technology Park of India. They have like cohorts every year. They select like entrepreneurs with ideas that they like, and then they get selected. So this year 10 companies got selected from Nagaland. And there's Lezo Putsure, who was a previous guest. He started this Edu Center School of Business, where they also train and basically mentor young startups and stuff like this. So they are like, how are you saying? There are a few of those around, and YouthNet is doing something along those lines. So there are quite a couple of organizations. So it's nice that we have that. Just wanted to add that there.
No, thanks for bringing that up. But in general, I think going outside of like the government job mentality is
Yes.
something that I'm like really appreciating, and
Yeah.
and if it can be a lot more indigenous related, like making the most of what Nagaland can offer. Like I look at different Northeast states, and this is just like my very basic brief overview, but like we can the vegetation in this state is amazing. Like we can literally grow so many things that
Right.
it's not conducive in say other places, so that, and I just feel like there's a lot of potential to sort of really make the most of what we currently have already.
Yeah. That's a nice point you made, because this is something that I feel is one of the sectors, like agriculture or horticulture. And besides, obviously, for me, tourism, I think, is a big thing that we have to take a different approach to maybe what we're doing right now. Don't want to be too critical, but like, we can be doing much more, I feel. And then obviously comes the sports and music. That's my thing. Yeah. So moving aside, let's touch on healthcare, because that's where you are, like, with your firm, you mainly consult on that, but not so specific with work related back in the US, but maybe just healthcare in general. Just share with us what's your, because this is something you said you're a little vocal about, or like you have like, thoughts about. So share with us a little bit about healthcare in general, and then maybe something that you see lacking here. You asked me this question, which I said it's basically non-existent, like, so healthcare.
Healthcare. Well, I think when I say healthcare, it also just comes from personal experience or things that I see, like for example, when my grandparents, right, when they have gotten sick for like more serious conditions, or just any family members or even family friends you hear of, like very few people, if you have the means, like stay here and get the care, or they'll opt to go to Assam, for example, or some other, and I understand like certain specialties, like we just don't have the infrastructure to support that and whatnot, which I feel like is a shame, and like some of the current doctors that I have met personally and all have been amazing. Like they're really good at what they do, and are superb, but we need maybe more of that, or we need the infrastructure to be such that like we can have like homegrown talent to just like nurture that even more, and just make it more accessible, right? Like I think you and I are lucky also that we live in like Dimapur or Kohima,
100%.
The bigger cities, so to speak, and we have easier access. But like we're talking also about like Nagaland in general, where the discrepancy, not just with healthcare, but overall development is
it's a big issue.
Stark, so again, this is, I don't mean to come in with this outsider view and like be saying like
I totally get what you're saying,
but in my ideal world, and this is not just for Nagaland, it would be amazing to just have accessible healthcare, like equitable healthcare for lots of people, right? And those needs are definitely like very different geographically and such, so there's that. I think for specialties such as like say cancer care, oncology care, I think now we have certain capabilities, but certainly a lot of room for that. And this is coming from like an American perspective, or at least my experience. Oncology care or healthcare and such, like academic centers and the hospitals go hand in hand. It's oftentimes not just a single hospital that is like a center of excellence because of just being a hospital, right? There's often like a heavily backed research component to it,
attached to it.
That's sort of like working in cohesive
tandem,
manner to like really be on top of things and such. So when I say healthcare, it's also like just like medical education, science education being a part of that, because for medicine, it definitely goes hand in hand.
Yeah, not just the infrastructure and the practice that's going on, but you're talking about everything that comes along.
You know.
Yeah.
And,
Sorry, just one thing, just to ask you quickly. In your ideal world, let's not call it the Nagaland government, the Indian government, the US government, whatever. But in your ideal world, healthcare, what should a government be providing its citizens? Keeping it realistic, not too, utopian, but like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some people might, that's too socialist or
Yeah. But just, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I've lived in Denmark, where the healthcare system is, like the government does pay for a lot of things, right? Certain things you have to pay what we call out of pocket and whatnot. But in places like Nagaland, I know there's like some insurance schemes as well where you can get some refunds and things like that.
Yes.
But for the most part, you have to pay out of pocket.
It's non-existent, basically. Yeah.
Like you may defer your access to care, or you may defer your care because you don't have the means to do it. Sometimes if you have insurance though, like you can sort of defray some of those costs because you have insurance to help cover it and such. But I think basic healthcare is something that should be covered. Honestly, this is a tough question, Asale. I don't know the limits per se, but I do feel like...
What are the basics that they should be providing, at least?
Routine checkups, screens, vaccinations. I mean, acute care is a little bit different, but like I would say, some infrastructure to support like chronic care would be amazing, right? And when I say chronic care, I think it's no surprise that like, diabetes is very high in Nagaland, high blood pressures, those types of diseases. And I know, and actually let's even talk about like alcoholism, right? Like that's a big topic, sometimes a taboo topic. A lot of these diseases and such, people sort of equate it to like, it's self-inflicted. You don't have the willpower to sort of deal with it and such. And there's some truth to that, right? But I think we should actually recognize that some of these are actual diseases and that you need like additional help for that, So I think some of those basic care should extend to that, to those types of ailments.
Okay, that was interesting. And you mentioned vaccination. I mean, you feel that like that comes under basic provisions by the government should be made for like our child's vaccinations and stuff like that?
I think so. I mean, we all got like vaccines for mumps and measles and all those things, and we'll continue to need vaccines as new diseases develop and such. So
okay, let's put science away for a minute.
Okay.
And this about traditions and culture, because this is something that I wanted your take on, since you've been away for a decade and a half now, living in the States. Prior to that, you were studying in Woodstock, we were studying there, and like that's also like being very far away from home. So for someone like you, how important is tradition and culture, our tradition and culture, your like Nagas in general, Ao in particular, and just your take on this, like.
I would say it's been very important in the sense of without knowing, you sort of like are like a default representation, right, of your culture.
Community.
And for me especially, like even going to Australia, being the first Naga in this setting or that setting, like nobody has heard of it, you go to like when I was in the States, or when I'm in the States, for the most part, like people ask you like, where are you from? And if you have the time, then you say like, I'm from Nagaland, and they'll be like, where is that? And default, you have to be a representation ambassador, so to speak, of your culture. So that has culture has been, it's been like a default thing. But at the same time, there's events where you have to like contend with it too, where you sort of maybe this is just growing pains and such too, but it's like your culture says this, but then you have developed your own form of culture just through exposure to so many other things that other people might not have had, so where does your culture, your sense of culture lie, and what does it encompass in that sense? Like, I don't mean to say you just pick and choose the good things from your culture and make that your own and neglect the others or something, but you do have to sometimes question, like, does this make sense? Does it make sense that we continue to follow this practice when maybe science doesn't really support that, or doesn't support this notion or that,
Right.
And you mentioned like my owl culture, like yes, that's what I've known. Of course, the broader Naga culture, like I've grown up with that in that sense, but at some point, like, you also have to just be very cognizant of like the risk of your sensibility of culture and tradition sort of like veering off to like maybe notions of tribalism as well. So like, yes,
100%, yes,
I'm Ao, but like is that not Naga enough? Or so I feel like while you should be proud of your culture and like in some ways also reclaim your culture, right? I think there's it's really important to sort of understand it. And when we talk about culture, like, we're talking about like maybe the 10% of what encompasses culture, right? Like that's very, like that very popular notion
generic,
of being an iceberg. Top percent, you sort of know like some of the songs, food related to it, but deeper down, what does that mean? And we maybe deeper down, like whether you're this tribe or that tribe, it might be similar, but we haven't explored that, because maybe we ourselves don't know that much about our own culture such that we can talk to somebody from another tribe to like see that as well. But so I would say it's important, but also just be aware that you shouldn't have a very myopic view of like what it is.
I think you said it perfectly, and I'm 100% in agreement when you say that, because I keep saying that tribalism is one of the most dangerous things in our society, and it's something that I feel is holding us back as a people, like to progress to wherever we need to or reach whatever levels. And when we always talk about traditions and cultures, like, you have every right to be proud of your own tribe, correct? But that fine line between being a proud Angami or whatever it may be and bordering on tribalism, it's like it's a very fine line, and we have to walk that carefully. Like, we have to be proud of our own tribe and our cultures and traditions, that's for sure, but like you said, not that myopic view. And like I think in another episode I had talked about this, saying like how we're just one dot. I mean, the entire globe is just a dot in the space, but like our people as a race, or not a race, but our people, Nagas, we're like, so it's, I don't know, nice to say insignificant, but like in the larger grand scheme of things, then we have like 2 million population,
right?
And that's nothing if you think about it.
The size of Latvia.
Yeah. Whose choir is here in Naga, basically. But we're that small, and like we can't be fighting amongst ourselves, and we have to look at the bigger picture. That's what I keep saying about tribalism.
And I mean, there's been examples in history, right, where people have been able to overcome that, like Tanzania, the country in East Africa, like as they were becoming a nation, getting their independence from the British and whatnot, like they have like over 100 tribes and ethnic groups there, but the first president, prime minister, the leaders anyway, like made it a point to really not downplay the differences between the tribes and such, but they are like a good example to see how despite the differences, you can still have a unified country and such, which I mean, many parts of Africa, tribalism has been like the bane of existence, right? That has like prevented like development and such, as you speak, as you say too. So there's like less innocuous impacts of like tribalism in Nagaland, but I think overall, I think it probably holds us back more than we estimate or really acknowledge, actually.
What do you, for some people, it's they sort of inherit that tribalistic point of view or outlook or whatever, and some people it's just ignorance, right? So my thing is like, I just want to know your take. My thing on tribalism is, I've said this before, just education, like learning about other people's immediate neighbors, like our other tribes, like the Ao tribe and the Sumi tribe and Lotha tribe, and learning about their cultures and traditions and all that. And when you move back, like learning about the Assamese, the other Indians, then other Asians, and if you educate yourself enough to learn and appreciate about other people's cultures, then I think, because traveling would be the best, but not everyone can travel all over the world or wherever it needs to be. So what's your take on like how to sort of tackle it? Mine is like, I keep saying it's like more education on other people's culture.
More education, definitely agree with that. But maybe it's also just like stop asking questions about like, oh, what tribe are you? Or I don't know. I mean, it's very natural, right? For us to just ask like, if you don't know the origin of that name, for example, then your immediate question is like, what tribe? I find myself doing this too, but does it matter, Why does it matter? Or is it called for in this context? Like, is it a cultural show where you have to acknowledge that? If not, then, why do we need to do
Interesting.
that?
Yes.
In that sense. So it's just maybe small things like that initially. But again, like, I don't have the solution to that.
Yeah, of course.
I'm just saying, like, there's a way to potentially acknowledge the differences and the intricacies of the different tribes, which is what also makes like Naga so rich in culture and the diversity of it. But at the same time, it's not dampening that necessarily, but it's somehow acknowledging that, yet at the same time not making that be the dividing factor.
Previous guest, auntie Bano Haralu,
okay,
she said it very nicely. She said, our diversity should be a strength and not our downfall. Like, so we have to realize that within, like, through our diversity and in our diversity, that's where our strength lies. And we have to, so everyone has to do it together. It can't just be me, it can't just be you, like, it has to be the whole. So yes, it was a nice conversation with a lot of setbacks, technical setbacks, but had more time to catch up off camera also, but that was nice. Before you wrap up, where does the future lie for Kilang? I'm talking about just what you're willing to share, but like, you in a few years time, 10 years down the line, what are you looking at?
Honestly, I'm not a planner. I know people have like 5-year plans and 10-year plans.
And are you ever coming back to Nagaland? I think I already know the answer to this, but I just want to ask you. And okay, before you answer, let me just tell you, there's something selfish that I always do, and I like, if there are any guests on the podcast who say, for example, work outside, not necessarily abroad, but just outside of Nagaland. My thing is like, I'm trying to bring them all back home, and for the selfish purpose of trying like the great minds like yours and the other people out there, like, come and help us, come and help Nagaland. That's my thing. So
I mean, again, ideal world would be like 50-50.
Okay.
It's I mean, almost half my life I've lived outside of Nagaland, right? And it's sort of getting to that point where I'm now, that's exceeding that, so that, like, Boston in some ways is as much of home as Nagaland is in some respect.
Right, right. I get
so
that.
it's very difficult to sort of just let go of my life back there and like come here. So in an ideal world, it would be some hybrid,
Okay.
But I definitely have a desire to try and do something here.
You better. You should. Please.
Like what that means, I say it, I just haven't really thought of
Figured it out.
Thought it out through yet. But would love to use this podcast also to just be like, hey, if there's anybody who wants to collaborate or even just start these discussions, whatnot, then I would love to, do that.
Awesome. If this podcast in any way produces something, then I'd be so happy. Like,
Yeah,
this
likewise.
Yeah. So we're gonna wrap up the podcast, and I asked you for 3 messages. First message is to friends, family. Second message is to friends. Could be to people you've lost touch with, and you're just using this podcast to get in touch with them. Third is to the Nagas in general. So a message or advice or just whatever it may be. You can take a minute, look into this camera, and
I have to look into the camera.
you can look at me also. It's fine, but yeah.
I think with family, just gratitude, honestly. It's the unspoken things, or whether it's the unspoken or the spoken things, it's a source of, support. And it's very hard to sort of think of how you can repay that to your family. And I don't just mean like my immediate family, I mean like, my extended family, including like my grandparents and such. So I would say that. My second one to my friends is, of course, there's some friends in my more recent life that I'm, obviously more in touch with, but I would say to my Naga friends who maybe in the past have tried to reach out to me and I haven't been as open for whatever reason or whatnot.
Super busy, yeah.
I mean, I would love to reconnect, I think we can be in different phases of life where that may not be as conducive and such, but definitely willing to, if people reach out, then do that. And the third one to Nagas in general, like I clearly still need a lot of education about just Nagas and Naga issues and Nagaland in general. So, please apologies for my ignorance in that sense, but open to, again, just learning a lot more. And there are things that are not as pleasant about our society, but I am also still very encouraged by just where people are moving towards, whether it's the entrepreneurial side of things or so like it, I think in general I'm very proud of what people have done so far, and I feel like I have had so many resources available to me. So to see people who haven't had as many resources as me, for example, do and achieve so much is really encouraging them. So
wonderful. I mean, I love that you ended it on that positive note. Our podcast is all about like spreading positivity while acknowledging people like you, all the guests that come. So thank you, Kilang, for being like a shining star amongst the Nagas.
Oh my gosh, no,
I gotta do this. I know you don't like it, but like I said, I feel like we have to shine more light on people like you and others like and thank you so much for making the time. I know you're super busy, and next time you're back, we need to do this again.
Yes, and thank you, Asale. Like you are the conduit to making all this happen, so the light really should be on you as well. So
thank you. That's a wrap.